I talk in another video about how I played Carnegie Hall. Granted, I only played cymbals, but I did play Carnegie Hall, and that was because I lost a bet. Today I'm going to tell you about an even more unimpressive musical achievement. I'm on the album Roger Waters' The Wall, and that's because I couldn't find a job. Welcome to the Innerst Files, thoughts on pop culture, history, and human nature from a very specific Generation X point of view. By the way, if you like the stories that you find here and would like to dive deeper into the Innerst Files, please consider joining Something Inconspicuous, a companion Skool.com community. It's a relaxed space for curious minds who enjoy thoughtful conversations about interesting ideas, good stories, and good storytelling. Details about Something Inconspicuous can be found in the description that accompanies this video. I can't help but think about inside jokes that sprung up as a result of the story I'm going to be telling you today. Whenever two or more people share an experience, it's only natural that you end up coming up with shorthand from that experience to represent larger concepts that you share. Stephen King talks about this in his novel Lisey's Story. He refers to it in the course of a marriage, how any marriage will develop a secret language. This is the nature of inside jokes. When I was in grad school, there were several of us who would always have lunch together, and we had a routine. Somebody would say, "Did you eat?" And then somebody would say, "No, did you?" And then somebody else would say, "Let's go eat." And over time, all of those phrases got shortened to "Jeet?" "No, Jew?" "Squeet." This is about that sort of shorthand. And it all started up when I saw The Wall in Berlin. I don't mean I saw the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall came down in November of 1989. This presaged the reunification of East and West Germany, and that presaged the collapse of the Soviet Union. Just as I was graduating with my degree in Russian and Soviet studies. I graduated 6 months after the Berlin Wall came down. After I graduated, I decided that what I was going to do was work my way across Europe. I had already spent some time visiting the Soviet Union, and it was an eye-opening experience. Now I wanted the same opportunity to explore other nations within the European community, it was the European Economic Community, what became the European Union. And my intention was to start in the United Kingdom. I would find a job there, and then I would work my way. I would work there for a little while, save up enough money, move on to France, and save up enough money, and then so on throughout Europe. It was a cunning plan that could not possibly fail, except I was able to get interviews. My resume was strong enough, both in terms of education and in terms of work that I had done while I was at university, but I couldn't get the job. Part of it was, at this particular time, London still had, and I think British culture in general, still had a glass ceiling, and or an old boys network, more so than a glass ceiling. I'm talking about an old boys network, where if you had the right degrees, knew the right people, you could slowly work your way into their graces and move on up. And it was a slow process. Already in the United States, though the old boy network was falling apart. People were no longer staying at jobs for super long. Companies were no longer proving to be quite as loyal to their employees, and so the employees were not proving to be quite as loyal to their employers. When I would have interviews in London, it would turn out that they would see me, they would recognize that I was young, they would realize that I'm an American, and then that would, or at least I grew up in America, and that would give them pause. I remember one job interview where the person I was talking with said, "Well, I'd really like to hire you, but how do I know you're still going to be here in 5 years?" I couldn't even imagine holding on to an assistant editor position for 5 years. I would have imagined that sometime within that 5 years I would have moved up. And of course, I was already planning on working for a few years, then moving on to other exploits within Europe. So that didn't work. The other thing that nobody had told me was that Europe at this time was experiencing a little bit of an economic recession, and that did make jobs harder to come by, and there was also more competition for those jobs. There was another job while I was there that I had really hoped to get. I applied for a job with the I don't remember, Muppet Studios, Jim Henson Studios, something like that. I can't remember what it was called, but it was the shop run by Jim Henson that had created the Muppets and had created the creatures that you see on Sesame Street. And Jim Henson died while I was actually hand delivering my resume to the company, and so that proved to be not fortuitous timing for me either. But while all of this was happening, I found out that Roger Waters was going to be performing The Wall in Berlin. Now, The Wall is kind of a big deal, and I don't know how well you, my devoted audience, would happen to know, but there was a band called Pink Floyd. They had an album called The Wall, and Pink Floyd The Wall was also turned into a movie. It was a concept album. It had 4 sides. It was a very long album, and some of the most amazing rock music. It was the template for rock operas to follow. It was taught in schools, and in fact, a friend of mine who worked at the same radio station that I had told me about how Pink Floyd The Wall was taught in a class that he took in high school. So, how could I not reach out to him when I found out that Roger Waters, who was a member of Pink Floyd had split up by this point, but Roger Waters was going to be performing The Wall with a whole bunch of celebrity performers in Berlin. I heard, while I was listening to a radio station in London, that it was possible to buy what's called a package tour that would take you from London into Berlin, and then you would be able to watch the concert, and your package included the concert and included lodging in Hamburg on the way out, and then Berlin, actually staying in Berlin and then returning. So this was an awesome opportunity, and it also appealed to me because my senior year in college, I decided to take German as a second foreign language. By this point, I had become fluent in Russian, and I felt confident enough that I could take another foreign language and I would hopefully be able to keep it separate from Russian, unlike when I had been younger and I had taken French and Spanish at the same time and got them hopelessly confused with each other. By the way, when I took German, my Russian improved immensely. Don't know that I can say too much about how my German worked out, but we'll get to that. Anyway, I phoned my buddy in the United States who had studied The Wall in high school and who had worked with me at WVBR, and I said, "Hey, you need to come out here because we're going to go see Roger Waters perform The Wall in Berlin, and they're going to have real helicopters at the concert." If you listen to the album Pink Floyd The Wall, there are several places where you can hear the activity of war going on. There are places where you can hear helicopters flying overhead. And this was one of the promises of this concert was that they were going to have real helicopters flying overhead at that point in the show, in the album. So I was telling my friend that he really needed to come out, but I wasn't expecting him to say yes. And much to my surprise, he did. He said he would figure it out. He was going to go ahead, buy a ticket, and head on out. Now, he did have a job. Good for him. That meant he had some disposable income, and he was able to buy a ticket and come out. He was going to stay for not for very long. Maybe we got to spend a day or two in London. Then we were going to take the package tour. We would get on a bus. We would go to Berlin, watch the show, come back, and then he would probably leave soon thereafter. Again, this show was it was a number of years ago. It was over 35 years ago. So I bought the package tour, and then my friend came out, and this was an interesting thing, is that I was able to travel on a second passport because I have dual citizenship, and my friend did not. So he had to travel on his American passport. And at this particular time, again, the United Kingdom was part of the EEC. And so you could travel between all those countries without really having to do much more than wave your passport as you were going through customs. However, since we had an American on the bus, we would have to stop so that his passport could be shown to the customs agents before the bus could resume. I thought that was very funny that I was part of the reason why the bus had to keep stopping for longer than it would have otherwise, because my friend had joined us on this trip. By the way, you can't really drive from London to Europe without a little bit of help. In this particular case, the tunnel that was going to connect Great Britain to France hadn't been finished yet. They were in the process of still building it. It was called the Channel, and it was the Channel Tunnel. It was going to be an awesome thing, but it wasn't built yet. So we got on the bus in London, which took us to the coast, which we then took a ferry across the Channel, and then continued to drive our way through Europe. When we stopped in Belgium, of course, we had to stop and buy some chocolate while we were there. And whenever the bus ride got to be a little bit long, we would each kind of encourage each other with, remember, real helicopters. Now, at one of the stops, while we had to wait for customs to process my friend's passport, there was like a tour guide. And the tour guide started making jokes with people on the bus about Mr. Spoon. I have no idea to this day what that was a reference to. And neither did my friend, of course. It was obviously a reference to some pop culture thing that was in the ethos in Britain at the time. I was assuming it was a recent television show or something along those lines. But anyway, anytime somebody would say, Mr. Spoon, the bus would break out in laughter. This ended up becoming another in-joke between my friend and I, because we would every once in a while just say to each other, Mr. Spoon, and it became our way of encapsulating that idea of the joke you just don't get. We got to Hamburg. And we got to Hamburg. Hamburg is in Germany, and I had taken some German. To quote another movie, Top Secret, I know a little German. His name is Hans. But I studied a little bit of German, and so we get to Hamburg. This is where we are going to spend the night before we resume our bus ride to Berlin the next day. And my friend and I found a restaurant that seemed like a likely enough place for us to buy some dinner. It was going to be a late dinner, but they were still open. And I noticed that they had on the menu something that I fell in love with when I lived in Moscow. It's called shashlik, and Russian shashlik is just amazing. They marinate it for, I don't know, a day or two, and it's got all this flavor. And I was addicted to the stuff. I would have it for lunch probably 4 out of 5 school days when I was in Moscow. So I see it on the menu, and I'm excited. I'm gonna get to have some shashlik. And my friend looks at the menu and he decides what he's going to order. Now, I get up to the counter to talk to the woman to tell her what I'm going to order. This was sort of a cafeteria style order situation, kind of like modern day Chipotle or whatever. I tell her what I want to order. And she obviously knew a little bit of English. And she insisted on speaking English, and I have to say, my German was bad. Her English was worse. And so the two of us kept kind of insisting that, no, 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 this is what I mean. Oh, you mean this. No, 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 not this, this. And it was a process going back and forth. Finally managed to get the order done, and it was fine. Everything was fine, paid for it, and then my friend goes up to order, and he stands up really straight. And then he points to a couple of things behind the glass. He points, he holds up fingers to indicate that he wants two of them. She's like, "Okay," and then she serves him those two things. No words were exchanged at all. Absolutely hilarious. And I will always remember the look on his face. He was positively giddy at how he was able to conclude his order super, super quick because he didn't use any German at all. That's funny. Anyway, so the next morning, we resume our trip to Berlin. Now, Berlin was fascinating. You could tell when you left East Berlin and got into West Berlin, or was it the other way around? I guess we went through West Berlin to get to East Berlin, because all of a sudden the stores stopped having personalized names, custom names, Frankie's or Bob's Music Emporium or whatever, and then you all of a sudden the architecture had changed. The architecture had become very rigid, square, concrete slabs everywhere, as opposed to the more varied Western style of architecture that we had gotten used to. And the names of the stores were all very descriptive and nothing more. The record store was called Record Store. And then the I don't know, there was a restaurant called Restaurant. Everything was like that. Barbershop was called Barbershop. And as I say, the architecture very different. And even so we were going to be staying in one of the hotels in East Berlin, presumably because it was less expensive than one of the hotels in West Berlin. But this is very near Potsdamer Platz, which was where we were going to be watching the show. The concert was going to be held in Potsdamer Platz. Think of Madison Square Garden in New York City, but think of it as an outdoor event. And so you're going to have people just absolutely mobbing this area. Potsdamer Platz had at one point been the central meeting place in Berlin before the Berlin Wall had come up and went right through it. So we stayed at this 4-star hotel. What we were told was a 4-star hotel, and it was actually I was used to those sorts of accommodations in the Soviet Union. It was fine. It was not what you would call a 4-star experience in the United States, but it was a hotel, it was clean, and we got our sleep. And then the next day we wandered around Or no, no, no. No, we checked in and then we went to go see the concert. I seem to recall that the estimate was there were 100,000 people at this show. They had sold so many tickets that it went beyond what they had the capacity to handle as far as people purchasing tickets goes. It was all going to be general admission anyway, unless you had VIP seating. So at some point, they stopped charging for tickets. That's fine. I didn't regret the fact that we had paid for our tickets, but that saved a lot of headaches as far as setting up entry points and security and all the rest of that. Huge. It was just a huge mass of humanity. And so we found our way in, and I think we might have picked up souvenir program or something like that just to prove that we were there. And ended up actually finding a spot where we were next to a bunch of folks who were serving in NATO forces from the United States. And so then we were, of course, speaking in English and talking about how things were going in the States and how things were going in Germany, and how there was just a certain excitement in the air, a certain optimism, and it wasn't just with our newfound friends who were in the NATO forces. It was everybody. It was everybody around us, and there were Germans, and there were people from Western Europe, and there were people from Eastern Europe. It was truly an amazing and magical moment. The opening band, or one of the opening acts, was a rock band called the Scorpions, who had a couple of hits in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. They were very, very big in Europe. And then an American band called the Hooters played. They were from Philadelphia in the United States, so they were up and coming, and it was obvious that they were going to become huge themselves. They didn't, as it turns out, but they were a great show. So there were several opening acts, and then it's time. It starts to get dark, and so it's time for them to start the show. And they start the show, but we can't hear anything at all. It's obvious that things are starting to happen on the stage. They're starting to move these big white blocks. And what happens in the course of the show is that these big white blocks get moved into position and slowly build a wall on the stage that is absolutely huge. And it's a very theatrical experience where different members of the band will show up at different locations where there's a few blocks missing from one part of the wall, and you can see what looks like a hotel room, and Roger Waters sings from there, and then there's all this spectacle going on. Well, it's starting, but we can't hear anything. And I think they got about 3 songs in when an announcer said, "We apologize, there's a problem with the sound system, but because we have started the show, we have to continue for the purposes of the recording, both the video and the audio recording. So now that we have sorted out the problem, the concert will continue in progress, but if you want to, you can stay at the end of the show when we reset and we re-record the first few songs." So if you ever listen to the album, it's not all one take, even though it sounds like it. It's actually 2 separate takes. The first half was recorded after the second half, or the first few songs were recorded after the rest of the show. Nonetheless, the sound comes on, and now we're able to hear what's going on, and there were a lot of different guest performers, as I had mentioned, singing different songs. I could go into all of the different artists. I don't know how many of them are as well known today as they were then, but it really was amazing as somebody who had worked at a rock and roll radio station when Paul Carrack was actually not only singing one of the songs, but he was part of the band. And if you're saying who's Paul Carrack, I can understand why, because some of these names are no longer as big as they were at the time. But it was pretty good. The sound system did leave a little something to be desired, but then again, it was an impromptu sound system that had been put up, and they hadn't really accounted for the mass of humanity that had accumulated there. At some point, we had real helicopters go over, and we're like, real helicopters! It really wasn't as impressive as we had expected it to be, but we were there, and it happened. And the show was fine. You can, if you listen to the album very closely, you can hear my friend and I and about 100,000 other people cheering during each of the songs, and you can hear us getting excited when some spectacle happens on the stage. Now, whether you'll actually be able to make out our specific voices, obviously the answer is no. But we're there, along with 100,000 of our closest friends. It wasn't an amazing concert, but it was absolutely an amazing experience. And from that point on, as I mentioned, my friend and I had a couple of new catchphrases, inside jokes that we would share. But more to the point was just this opportunity to be in a situation where you're sharing an experience with so many people, and it was filled with so much hope. The euphoria in the crowd, just at the very thought that the Berlin Wall used to be where we were standing, and it was gone now. The division between East and West, the Cold War, was over. And a sense of relief, a sense of possibility was absolutely palpable throughout the entire experience. In the end, because I continued to find it difficult to find a job, I eventually returned to the United States and then decided that rather than work my way around the United States, I would go to grad school, which I also talk about in another video or two. But the waiting period between when I returned from the UK and when I was going to start grad school, I returned to the town where I had worked in radio, and I filled in for some slots. And it was a lot of fun to tell the story because the album had come out by this point, and I could introduce the song that I was going to play from the album, and it was just a unique opportunity, a unique experience to be able to commune with the radio audience at the time. And I heard about it then later on. I'd go out and get some gas, and the person I was paying for the gasoline would say, "Oh yeah, I heard you on the radio, and I heard this thing, and that was really cool." Yeah, it was a unique time in our history in terms of the sense of optimism that just permeated everything. I will also note that the United States at the time was not going through quite the same recession that Europe was, although we did experience a little bit of a recession to the point where the president ended up serving only one term because the person who was running against him came up with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." So even a modest dip in the economy can make a huge difference in terms of who ends up getting into or staying in office. But that's probably a topic for another day. In the meantime, I'm going to sign off with the way I would occasionally sign off when I worked at the radio station. And it was a sign off that was a parody itself of another famous sign off that anyone from Generation X would recognize. Casey Kasem, when he would sign off from the American Top 40 show, my parody of it: keep your head in your clouds, keep your head in the clouds and your feet in your mouth. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.